we've confused making a lot of money with doing things that actually help people. In fact, I've been a part of 2 startups where that didn't happen. One where I was the chief growth officer of a little seed stage startup, and the founder basically blew all our money at Art Basel. And if you want me to tell that story, just come up afterwards. So that was one. And then there was another Series D that was in an industry where basically the bottom dropped out of the market, and we weren't able to continue operations. So you absolutely have to pay attention to finances, of course. But if you think about, let's say you've founded a new consumer-facing app. So in the initial stages, you look at things like installs and opens and retention, basic set of metrics. Let's say your business gets more successful, and then you start thinking about, all right, how do I keep people engaged? So you get a second set of metrics like MAU, revenue, time in app, and so forth. Eventually, hopefully, you continue to grow and you get more and more exotic over time. So you look at DAU over MAU, LTV, but basically all of these derived metrics. And then you get to the point where you've developed a certain set of measures that allow you to tell how your business is doing that really don't make sense anywhere else. But these financial abstractions don't really change over time. And if you look at the way that, for example, corporate executives are compensated for the way that they run their business, it's really things like if your stock price gets to X, you get $10 million. And if it gets another $10 a share, you get another $10 million, and so on. And the problem with that is, if anyone's heard this before, this was an English mathematician, I think he's from the 19th century, named Charles Goodhart. But he said, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to become a good measure. In other words, human nature being what it is, if you say your goal is to get $10 million in revenue, then you're going to do that thing no matter what. In other words, you're going to go after it, even potentially to the harm of the rest of your business's ecosystem, because that's the only thing you're incentivized for. And I worry about the way that we've kind of overly focused on things like revenue, profitability, share price, basically all of these financial abstractions, because they come from a very different world. The underlying fundamentals, the structure, the products that you're making change. Why do we still look at this 20th century model for the way that we sort of run our business? And it's especially important when it comes to technology. And I worry about this because you can already see how this kind of profit at all costs is starting to distort markets, corporate incentives, and so on, even before technology became a thing. And so I'm increasingly concerned that as the tech industry has gotten big and influential, it's also entering its big tobacco phase, let's put it that way. Now, I'm generally an optimist about technology. I think it has a lot of liberating and sort of efficiency-gaining potential, but not under the regime of financialism. And here's why. You kind of think, if you're an engineer, you kind of think that somebody else has the incentive to be the adult in the room. But if you look at the way that executives are compensated, for the most part, their pay depends on financial performance. If you look at the way that boards of directors function, they're really there to protect the fiduciary interest, and it's extremely rare, even though it's technically part of their job, that they have the interest or even the ability to enforce some of these safety concerns. And of course, investors are seeking maximum returns, which is fine. That's what they're for. This last part, I think, is becoming increasingly important in the age of tech mega companies. That regulators lack the experience, lack the leverage, lack the expertise to really police some of these things. And when they do, all they're going to do is levy a fine afterwards. So if you remember the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal in 2016, 2017? About then. After investigating that, the FTC released its biggest fine in history, $5 billion. Anybody want to guess how long it takes Meta to make that much money? It's a little bit less than a day. It's a rounding error. So they lack the leverage to do anything about it. So I'm afraid that with nobody else, you and people like you are going to have to do the hard work of actually protecting people against bad technology. The first part is, you kind of think of it as a reverse sabotage, but basically taking the responsibility to do things like add quality control, like add that extra layer of protection against bad technology. Because if you think about it, in the Boeing example, people can't opt out of flying a Boeing airplane. They don't have the market power to dictate what people are using. In the Uber example, the pedestrian didn't have a market power to decide if she was going to get run over or not. It just happened because the car was on a public street. The good news is that your boss won't know what you're doing because they're only looking at the financials. So if you can do it in such a way where you can actually build this stuff into your software, build these safeguards, then I think you can get away with it. The second thing is using the expertise of engineers, product designers, to push back against some of this managerial overreach, as I call it. Most companies, engineers, product people are in their own silo. They can advance through the ranks, but they're really not given a seat at the decision-making table when it comes to the direction of product decisions, overall strategy. Ironically, unlike, let's say, your sort of typical factory worker or your typical Uber driver, they have a huge amount of leverage within the company. I mean, I think we've all worked on projects where you lose one person and that sets the whole thing back months, if not years. And so if you think about the leverage that we have, I think it's more than we realize. We just have not really been able to utilize it. And I think part of that is the individualistic culture of technology, or at least how it's been for the most part over the last couple of years. You're paid very well relative to the rest of the world. You're sort of told that as long as you can code really well, you'll rise to the top. And partially that's true. But I think as we've seen with some of these corporate layoffs over the last couple of years, once it's in a company's financial interests to turn you loose, they'll do it. And nothing about this sort of meritocratic narrative is going to save you. At the same time, we've bought into it so hard that we're allowing ourselves to say, well, you know, if there's a whistleblower, if there's a walkout, and it's not exactly what I care about in exactly the way that I care about it, I'm just not going to bother with it. And so we've missed out on some of these opportunities to create this counterweight to financialism and managerialism. And I don't know if any of you were at the whistleblower panel yesterday, but I think that's another theme that came out, or even at Meredith Whittaker's keynote also yesterday. I mean, we have a huge amount of power and leverage, but we don't step into it, and it's right there. And I think the last thing is, and I know this will hurt some people, but walking away from bad employers. I know that some of them pay like $500,000, $1 million, but at some point, you've just named your price for being bought. And it's like being in a bad relationship. Oh, I can fix the person, I can fix the person. Well, probably not. But they sell you the myth of being able to do so, and they sell it to you with money and stock options. So this is kind of the capsule version of this book I wrote, and it's the reason that South by invited me back. It's called Fatal Abstraction, Why the Managerial Class Loses Control of Software. And it steps through a bunch of different case studies. Boeing and Uber are in there. We also talk about Microsoft, generative AI, and a couple of other things too, and in a lot more detail. And it's the reason that I did it is because having been in the tech industry, I just got disillusioned by the fact that we seem to be going away from the industry's utopian roots. And we've seemed to have lost the idea that technology can do good because we're chasing the amount of money that it can make us. And the more that we do that, I think the more that we'll unfortunately find that technology isn't this sort of big, liberating, essentially utopian unlock, but it's this digital straitjacket that the more we bind it to ourselves, the more it suffocates us.